very happy to be with you here today. The Ask an Expert series is brought to you in partnership with the County of Simcoe, ourselves, the Small Business Center, South Georgian Bay Small Business Enterprise Center, Aurelia Area Community Development Corporation, Nottawasaga Futures, North Simcoe Community Futures Development Corporation, and the Center for Business and Economic Development. Today, our topic of conversation with our panelists, who I'll introduce in a moment, is around cybersecurity. In the last, obviously, 6 to 9 months, one's online presence and digital presence has become quite a topic of conversation, and has risen in terms of a company's importance as we pivot our products and services online in order to be able to combat the effects of COVID-19 on our business. However, underpinning that is an ever-greater need for cybersecurity. Indeed, in a recent survey, 69% of Canadian businesses reported some sort of cyber attack, with an average cost of $15,000 per attack. So clearly, cybersecurity is something of high importance and not to be ignored. So we've assembled quite an expert panel with us today. Very excited to have everybody with us. We have 3 panelists. I'll introduce them in turn. So, starting with AJ Khan, who is the CEO of Cyber Strategize Inc., with over 13 years of experience in cybersecurity, innovation, and emerging technologies. We have Carl Hayes, Partner and Vice President of Business Development for Strategem, 12+ years of experience in architecting complex IT solutions. And Sumit Bhatia, Director, Knowledge Mobilization and Communications with Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst and Tech Entrepreneur. So welcome, gentlemen. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We solicited some questions from our audience in advance, and these questions will tend to throughout the afternoon. And also I would like to say to the participants, to the registrants, the audience today, if you have any additional questions, feel free to add them into the chat box or the Q&A box, and we'll try to get through them. Okay, so just to begin with, gentlemen, if there's, I'll look at a few of the questions that we have here, but there seems to be quite a thread in terms of throughout the questions, and I wonder if you could, add your thoughts on whether small businesses are as at risk from cyber attacks as, say, some of the larger companies that we're aware of. Obviously, we're aware of some of the more high-profile attacks. We hear less about some of the, the attacks on small companies outside of perhaps our own, local circle. But would you say it's fair to say that that small businesses are equally as at risk from cyber attacks as larger companies?
Steve, I'm happy to jump in and kick things off there. Thank you again for having us here, and I think it's really important to be talking about this with small medium businesses. And to your point, I think the security threat that lies before small medium businesses has never been more important. We've seen digital transformation, and we've heard of digital transformation taking place now for the last 20 years or so, and it's ushered us into this innovation economy and continues to drive its importance to organizations, I'd say, of all sizes. And while the transformation mandate has been taken on by many organizations, we know that enterprises have led the way, and SMBs have somewhat fallen behind, and for very practical reasons. One, a lot of small, medium businesses have never fully understood the true impact of the risk before them. And second, there's not always the access to resources, knowledge, time, and money to really be able to invest in all of these pieces. Now, what that's done is it's left them quite vulnerable to attacks in general, but especially at a time when we're dealing with a pandemic, where people are working from home, people are very rapidly going through a digital transformation exercise, especially with small, medium businesses, really trying to survive and continue to operate. are dependent on technology as taking them and ushering them into this new era that we're going to be dealing with, which really leaves them open and susceptible. If we look at the numbers, we know that there has been almost a 600% rise in attacks in general across the landscape just through the pandemic in the last 6 months. And a lot of these attackers have some understanding that small, medium businesses are behind in protecting themselves, that they're still dealing with very operational issues. How do I take my business online? How do I make sure that my customers come along with me? How do I make sure that now that I'm working from home and my people are working from home, that I'm managing networks, systems, emails? And so those are really fundamental questions. And I think, to your point again, it is extremely important that we discuss these and at least be able to share some best practices, because I do believe that 80% of the problems that small, medium businesses deal with can be addressed by following some best practices and benchmarks and guidelines that would help them move forward in this space.
So I would like to echo what Sumit said, and I think he raises some very good points as far as the environment in which the small and medium businesses today operate. I want to look at it from 2-3 different aspects. One is your operational aspects. In today's connected world, even to operate a small and medium business, you do have to have cybersecurity built into your entire infrastructure and in your entire ecosystem. But during COVID-19, we have seen that how important e-commerce has become for small and medium business. So are your credit card transactions secure? Is the infrastructure which has the private information of your customers, is that secure? What impact does a cyber breach have on your business and your customers? Can you survive that kind of a cyber breach? So those are the questions which small businesses and medium businesses need to ask themselves, and that would ultimately lead to a better better connected world for us, where when we are moving towards smart cities and connected and autonomous vehicles and those kind of environments. So we all need to move further and further towards a more cyber secure world.
And I guess I would just very quickly echo the sentiments of both AJ and Sumit, but I would suggest that in my experience, small businesses are at lesser risk of what I would define as being sophisticated or targeted attacks. This is because the nature, size, and profile of the business itself applies to adversaries, who are looking to realize some form of gain. And therefore, what I would suggest is that while the risk does exist, I mean, the risk associated with, sort of the generic or commonplace security threats or threat vectors that are out there and impact all of us as individuals and small to medium-sized business, as well as large business, this is not an insurmountable task for small businesses to conquer in terms of being able to implement the necessary controls, awareness, and education that I think would mitigate the vast majority of the risks that 99% of those categorized within that specific domain, would face on a day-to-day basis. And I think that, as we move forward in today's discussion, we're going to articulate and illuminate what some of those solutions may look and feel like.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen, for those comments. And actually, that does, Kyle, lead sort of nicely into one of our other questions, which is, for a small company that doesn't have an IT department, doesn't have IT support, where should one start? Are there particular, software programs, outsourcing solutions where one should start when just setting up the basics of a cybersecurity program? I'll hand that over to you, gentlemen.
Sure. So I'll start just as a sort of a dovetail into my last comments. Yes, I think that there are, very easy to adopt, inexpensive approaches that one can take to solve that problem. So first and foremost, I would recommend that you ensure that your corporate assets, your digital assets, namely your workstations, your laptops, if you have servers, that they're adequately protected with the appropriate security software that's commercially available to the marketplace. There are many, many solutions within this category. Here at Stratagem, we partner with, true enterprise-grade platforms like, for instance, CrowdStrike, as well as Fortinet, within those domains. But again, a quick search of what's known as next generation endpoint detection and response, or the acronym NG EDR, would solicit no shortage of potential solutions that could be made very easily commercially available at a relatively low cost. And first and foremost, I would recommend that you have those solutions in place on those devices. The other thing that I would simply suggest is that you need to be educated and aware. The vast majority of attacks or attack vectors that I think small and medium-sized business, as well as large business, are going to face relate to social engineering. And that's because the weakest element within the sort of security ecosystem is, in fact, the individual, the human element, if you will. And so, educating yourselves, we often talk about living in the information age, and yet with all of the access to information that we have at our fingertips, it's amazing to me as to how ill-educated, many people are on this subject. And so once again, I would suggest that without even making an investment, into a training platform, one could simply do a Google search on this subject of security awareness training and, be immersed in no shortage of information that I think, is certainly relevant, and depending upon the source itself, could actually be entertaining, not a snooze fest, so to speak, but something that's very entertaining, practical, and engaging that then you can in turn apply, as you work through each and every day. And I think those would be my two recommendations in terms of how a small business without an in-house IT staff would be able to effectively deal with the vast majority of security threats today.
Yeah, I would agree with Carl as well. And I'll just say, I think a good place to start is believing that you are important to an attacker for different reasons. Right? I think the fact that we have not done as much to protect SMBs is known. And sometimes attackers are looking for data. Other times they're simply looking to hold you hostage. And frankly, there's other times where it's actually just for practice. And small, medium businesses are an easy target. So I'd say believe that you are an important target, even if you think you do not have data or anything to give up. The other part really is think about building a culture of cybersecurity. And that is going to require by, first of all, starting to think about how to educate your people about the importance of cybersecurity. And that requires ongoing awareness training. There's a lot of information online available for free that you can access. Look for cybersecurity education for SMBs. I can tell you at the Catalyst, one of the programs we are going to be launching over the next couple of months is a free resource for SMBs. And where it starts with is, around building a culture, start thinking about building a plan. What is your cybersecurity response plan? What is your cybersecurity plan? How do you enforce it? Now, a plan doesn't have to be complex. It can be extremely simple. You can have 10 bullet points on it. But what it does, it is make sure that you're committing to a process and that when something happens, you have something to go back to. And frankly, it also helps your customers and people that you work with believe that you take this seriously. On other pieces, I'd say there's a few critical things that you should do. Know what your inventory of technical assets is. Identify all the different pieces that you're working with. Make sure you secure your passwords. Passwords can often be the weakest link in a cybersecurity chain. Determine how you give access to your systems to different people. Not everybody requires access to everything. Think about what that means. Make sure that you are investigating the third-party services that you're using, especially if they're cloud-based services. Do a little bit of homework. Understand if it's a public cloud, a private cloud, a hybrid one, and what that means to you. And then also start thinking about basic protocols, such as backing up your data regularly, making sure you're using a firewall and a VPN network, and then having some sort of a business continuity planning. I always say appoint an ambassador within your organization who holds your cybersecurity torch and is responsible for making sure that the basics are covered. And it doesn't matter what size of organization you have. I think these are important pieces to get started with.
I definitely echo Sumit and Carl what they have said. So as they said, the very first thing is acknowledging that you can be a cyber target, and an acknowledgement of that, and then having a plan, as Sumit said, is very important. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is consider if you have a cyber breach right now, just this moment, what is your instant response plan? What will you do? So I have this friend who runs his own graphic designer small studio, an agency, media agency. And what happened was that one day his Gmail was hacked, his phone was hacked, and he used that phone for his business purposes. And from there, his business bank account was hacked. And from there, his where he stored all his data was hacked. And then his customer information was hacked. Ultimately, there were credit cards being issued in his business name out there. So he was dealing with fraud departments of various banks. He was dealing with fraud departments of the telco, which had issued the phone. He was trying to get data from Google because his Gmail had been wiped out. What would happen if your business suffers that kind of incident right now? Are you prepared for that? Sumit and Carl both gave some great insight on how to protect yourself. But the question is, are you prepared? So one of the most important thing in cyber is preparation. You have to be prepared. You have to, this is something which might never happen to you, but what if it happens to you? And as Sumit said, do you have a business continuity plan? And do you know, in case of an incident happening right now, a cyber incident, who do you contact? What are the authorities you have to contact? So all of those could be as simple as having a one-pager in your business place which has all the contact information. So those are the kind of things you have to consider.
Yeah, thank you. I really think those are, two very, very key points, in as much as acknowledging that we are all subject to attack, and having that plan in place so that it's a turnkey plan in the event of an attack. So thank you. Very key points. Interesting question here that raises, though, is there one key area that we see most attacks, or the majority of attacks, directed towards? For instance, attacks mainly directed towards a company's email, or to their customer records, or to their internal data. Is there one sort of area where we see a trend that most attackers attempt to get into a company's records? I don't know who would like to jump in on that. Sumit?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I actually, I think Carl pointed out earlier, which that point around social engineering attacks being the most common. And I truly believe that. And that's because social engineering relies on, tricking people. And it's easier to do on certain threat surfaces. Again, I think Carl and AJ had both mentioned earlier, things that we often see, things like malware attacks, which could be, viruses placed on your system, a hijacking of your system. Usually I find with small, medium businesses, emails are very susceptible because emails are not being managed appropriately. I think ransomware is a common thing that we see simply because that's a very predominant type of malware that's being placed that allows them to take your system hostage, and you'll see a lot of those. But now, as we're moving into this new space, and again, I think one of my fellow panelists talked about is, reliance on e-commerce. Which e-commerce providers are using? How are you collecting payment card information? And how are you protecting the privacy of your customers when you're collecting this information? Those are points of, again, vulnerability and threats that exist. but I think, again, I would go back to what Carl mentioned earlier, which is social engineering attacks probably are the most common that we're seeing with small, medium businesses because they provide easy access to get into any one of these doors and then be able to hijack a system.
Yes, thank you for that, Sumit. That makes perfect sense. And actually, it also plays off a point that AJ made a moment ago around passwords. And one of the questions we have from the audience today is around keeping passwords secure, and not so much just how to keep them secure, but the sheer volume of passwords that we're all expected to manage and remember now. You know, trying to follow best practices of never using the same password twice can be really, really tricky when we have, you know, any number, probably 25, 30 online accounts each if we add them all up. So I wonder, gentlemen, you could add some, offer some advice on inexpensive alternative ways to, you know, to track one's passwords. Are there any particular password keepers out there that you particularly like? Just wondering what your thoughts would be on that.
Maybe I'll jump in first. Passwords are always tricky. You know, all of us are asked, you know, throughout our personal and professional lives to set up no shortage of accounts, each, of course, with its own unique username and password for almost virtually everything that we do, both personally and professionally. And it is true that best practices mandate the need for different passwords, and those best practices should be followed. The reason, of course, being that if I am able to compromise one of your accounts, and if in fact you choose to use that password universally across multiple platforms, my ability then to be able to, you know, expand that threat and attack surface rapidly is there day one. And so you want to ensure that not only are you following best practices and implying best standards as it pertains to, you know, the password itself, you know, the construction of that password, how many characters, alphanumeric, et cetera. You want to ensure that, again, you're using different passwords for different applications that have different purposes. To solve this problem, what I would recommend, again, is a commercially available solution like Duo, that's D-U-O, security for what's called single sign-on. The company was actually recently acquired by Cisco, and for a relatively small fee, you can effectively end the frustration associated with password management and ensure that you're following secure practices that are very easy and not cumbersome. You know, I know that in the question that was raised, somebody had referenced that they store all of their passwords on an Excel spreadsheet. I would again suggest that that's definitely not a good idea. And there are reasons, not just by virtue of the fact that, you know, an adversary or a hacker may gain unwarranted access to the device where that spreadsheet lives and breathes. I mean, it could just be as simple as, you know, somebody within the ecosystems in which you operate, you know, colleagues, friends, family, also being able to gain that access. And, you know, these items, notwithstanding the fact that these people are close to us and, you know, I'm sure are trusted, these are things that we wouldn't divulge normally, you know, to just anyone. They are very personal. You know, these applications house personal information. And again, it should be treated as such. But there are solutions in the market that can help solve this problem. I will attest to the fact that this is a challenge that we're all facing. And it's not, so it's very universal in that, you know, it impacts us personally, it impacts us professionally, it impacts us in small, medium, and large size business, but there are solutions.
Carl has given some amazing and great insights on password protection. I just wanted to add that you should have two-factor authentication on all your bank accounts. You should have two-factor authentication, if possible, on your email. For example, which devices you are logging on from, you could base it on that. If you are, for example, an Amazon affiliate, you should have two-factor authentication on your Amazon store. So wherever you can have two-factor authentication, where your device from which you are logging on is being validated, or maybe you're getting even just an SMS on your phone and putting in a code. So those kind of things, and of course tools like Duo and other tools like that can always be implemented. But do some homework, look at where you can enable two-factor authentication, and make sure that for your critical assets like your bank accounts and other such assets, enable that two-factor authentication.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in just on one other point. I think Carl and AJ have covered, majority of the best practices. I just want to bring people's attention to something that I think we often forget about, which is zombie accounts. And zombie accounts are typically referred to as old email accounts or accounts that you set up that you've forgotten about and don't use, that still have an old and weak password associated with them. And I just want to draw this attention on this topic simply because we don't pay attention to them. It's easy for somebody to actually attack them and go unnoticed. And so I just bring that into this conversation because those are often accounts that, even as you update your passwords on other accounts and use some of the tools that AJ and Carl talked about, that we forget about those accounts and that we continue to pay attention to either shutting them down or just readdressing them with new needs.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Sumit. I'm sure I'm not alone when I say that, I probably have an old Hotmail account or Yahoo Mail account somewhere that I probably should look at and secure or delete. Carl, did you have something you wish to add to that?
Yeah, just very quickly, and I'm sorry if you're hearing some background noise. I'm having some work done at my house, so apologies in advance. But I would suggest that there are websites, and I'm going to see if I can actually post one that I know to be reputable and secure, that actually assess the strength of your password. You'd be amazed as to how many people, for instance, and perhaps some people on this call, when it comes to selecting a password, they use the word password. Now maybe they use the word password with, the @ symbol as opposed to an A, but password 1234. I mean, these are very common. And I think, again, it's very important that when we talk about the subject of cybersecurity, we're talking about a big issue facing all of us, but I don't think it's one that we need to be scared of. And I don't think that the value prop behind undertaking certain actions or making certain investments needs to be sold on fear. The vast majority of attacks or attack vectors that would impact those of you on this call or all of us are generally speaking very unsophisticated. You have to appreciate and understand that those who would want to attack you, those who would want to try and steal your data or to cause some form of disruption or hold you for ransom per se, human nature dictates that these people are generally lazy. They cast a very wide net. They take the path of least resistance. And how that relates to my comment on passwords is, again, this is where if you have a simple password, it becomes very easy leveraging open source, widely available tools to be able to crack those. Implying certain standards in terms of how you construct your passwords goes a very long way to solving that problem. And again, I would encourage you to leverage the power of the internet. I'll see if I can send that link, or maybe I can get it through to you, Dave, but where you can anonymously and without in any way saving the data, test the strength of your password or just play around with the system to get a sense as to what constitutes a secure password, and use that to inform your go-forward approach as it pertains to how you construct your passwords for various accounts. And one other thing I would mention is, remember, not all applications or platforms are created equal. As AJ said, your banking, your personal banking or your business banking, requires a much higher level of security, arguably, than, I don't know, something perhaps a little bit more
Oh, I'm afraid we've lost you there, Carl, for a moment. But while we wait for Carl to to come back online there.
And the other.
Sorry, Carl, we lost you for a moment or two there. Perhaps you could repeat your last couple of sentences for us.
Sorry, I apologize. Where did you lose me at? I apologize.
I would say if you could repeat the last minute or so. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I guess I was just saying that, look, this is not something that we need to be fearful of. Adversaries cast wide nets, which is why simplified passwords present a real risk. But the ability for you to leverage tools that would help inform you as to what the strength of your password is, and to apply that accordingly to those applications, that would be, or that you should want to protect most. For instance, as AJ had articulated earlier, your personal or business banking applications or data, you can use that as an output to be able to construct an appropriate password. And I intend on providing that a link to a website to assess the strength of your password that I know to be secure and reputable. And Dave, perhaps I can do that through you after today's meeting.
Yes, certainly, by all means. And it's interesting. You should I note your point that by sheer human nature, that many of the attackers and hackers are lazy. And I think they're looking for the low hanging fruit. And I think that the lesson here is to us is to not be that low hanging fruit. We do have a couple of questions that have been put in the chat box, and I'll pick up on those at the moment. So interesting question around cybersecurity insurance. Should SMEs be considering including cybersecurity insurance along with their general business insurance? One would assume yes, but do you have a sense as to the cost and to the practical application of such insurance?
Yes, I think that's a very interesting question. And that question is very relevant to what we are doing right now. Cyber insurance should be part of your general insurance, or you can take it separately. The important thing here is when you take the cyber insurance, you have to actually validate what kind of coverage you are getting, because specific cyber incidents need to be looked at, what kind of data you are protecting. So when you start talking about cyber insurance, you have to make sure that you're getting the cyber insurance which is relevant to what you need and which protects you from specific threats like ransomware and other such threats. I think when you move into things like e-commerce and credit card fraud, so then you start looking at a different parameter of cyber insurance, and based on your business, you have to understand what you actually need from that particular cyber insurance policy.
Quite. Carl, Sumit, would you have anything to add to that?
I think that cyber insurance is, it's a relevant discussion point. Again, I think predicated upon the nature of your business, the partnerships that you have, what the value of those partnerships are, and the value of the data that you house will probably determine whether or not cyber insurance is a right fit, or more specifically to AJ's point, what cyber insurance you should look to get, or what would be recommended to you. I have direct experience in working together with the cyber insurers. I can tell you that, policies can range anywhere from, for a small business, a couple of $1,000s per year on up. They do provide typically extensive coverage in the event that there is a security breach, and specifically, what the insurer does is they typically will facilitate a relationship with an incident responder who would then be contacted to assess and deal with the incident that is at hand. Now, $2,000 may sound like a lot of money, and it may be a lot of money. But what I can share with you is that in the realm of incident and breach response, the generally accepted hourly rate for those types of services with a 4-hour SLA or service level agreement is approximately no less than $250 per hour. And typically it involves as well a sort of a one-time setup fee, which in the event of cyber insurance, all of that is covered and all of that remains in play. So what the insurance offers, just to be very clear, is effectively, to give an analogy, it's like the bat phone that you could pick up in the event of a cyber incident or a breach, think, for instance, of ransomware, and in doing so, be able to engage through your insurer with a network of organizations that can come in to assist, to remediate, and ultimately resolve the problem. What cyber insurance does not do is it does not solve the security challenge by itself. It does not make you any more secure. It does, in fact, make you more prepared to deal with a security incident or a breach. So that's the one point of differentiation I would make.
If I can just add to that, I think Carl mentioned something extremely important, which is insurance is not the solution. It just helps protect you financially, and often in the case of regulation as well. And that's sort of the other point that I'll make, is that as make sure that you understand your compliance and regulatory requirements for your industry. And if you're working with specific types of customers and clients, as you're working with larger enterprises, government agencies, you will likely find that these organizations are increasingly insisting that their partners, suppliers, contractors have some level of cybersecurity insurance. So I would just add that you make sure that you check what the requirements for your industry and your business partners are as well.
No, I think those are great points, gentlemen. We certainly shouldn't see an insurance policy as our cybersecurity solution. It is the backup should things go wrong. I fully understood. Some more questions that are coming into the chat box here, gentlemen. I mean, this is a very vibrant conversation, as is demonstrated by the questions that we're getting. So thank you very much so far. Mac versus PC, is one platform more secure than another? Would you have a preference? Are there certain additional considerations that one should take into account when one is choosing Mac over PC or vice versa? AJ, I'm not sure if you would like to chime in on that.
Yeah, so I think ultimately any system is as strong or as weak as the cyber protections on that system. So if you think about any system, if a password is not secure on it, then it's not secure. So it doesn't matter what is the underlying technology on that. Similarly, from my perspective, I think it is also very relevant on what kind of ecosystem you have around the system. So for example, is your network secure? Do you have network level security? Are you monitoring that system? So I would not say that one system is more secure than the other. I think it has to be more looked at from a wider perspective, and also look at the threats which are out there, and whether you're doing patching updates, whether you are doing vulnerability management. So all of those come together, and then either system could be secure, depends on how proactive you are as far as your cybersecurity practices are concerned.
Just to add to AJ's comment, I would simply suggest that I think at one time it could be definitively stated that that Macs were more secure than Windows-based devices, but that wasn't because there was additional or enhanced security embedded within their device. It was simply because they formed such a small percentage of what was being actively used in the marketplace. I mean, and virtually 0% within the enterprise or within business. That you have to imagine that when back in the days when we were concerned about viruses, as adversaries would look to write those viruses or those signatures, they would look to once again target the broad scope. They wouldn't be interested in spending a lot of time to go after such a narrow or niche market. But as time has evolved, and as I think most of us now own at least one Apple device, the truth of the matter is that, back to AJ's point, I would simply suggest that there isn't any meaningful difference in the security between Windows-based devices and Apple-based devices. The need to ensure that you have the appropriate security embedded on those devices is to your discretion and is your responsibility, and the environment or ecosystem in which those devices operate and the security therein is also your responsibility. So hopefully that provides some additional perspective.
Certainly does. Thank you, Carl. Sumit, would you have anything to add there, or have the gentleman adequately covered that?
You know, I think my colleagues here have covered majority of the ground. I find this question especially fascinating and because of the reason Carl pointed out, which is I think we've come a long way from the impact and the volume at which Macs and Apple used to operate in. And I find that we're still sort of catching up in the perceptions that has created. But I think my fellow panelists articulated some of those pieces very clearly.
Indeed. Yeah. You know, it actually segues. Oh, sorry, AJ, you had something to add?
I just thought of something here. So when we were talking about, those earlier days when we had all our data on our laptops or on our computers, but now our data is not on our computers. Our data is in the cloud. So your system is just a device to access your data. Your data is somewhere out there where it doesn't really, your device getting hacked, for example, doesn't impact the criticality of security of your data. So the more important thing to understand is where is your data and how is it being protected. So for example, you might be using Office 365. Where is your data in Office 365 and how is it being protected? And in Office 365, do you have any specific controls on the data? So for example, can you see who downloaded that data? Can you see who is moving the data from here to there and what are the permissions on the data? So those are the things which you have to see. Look at where your data is, follow the data and secure the data.
Actually, AJ, that is a perfect segue to the next question. Thank you. Specifically, someone has asked us about Google Drive and how do we feel about Google Drive? Is it a secure place from which to store my files and effectively run my business from? So if one of you would like to give some opinion on Google Drive.
I'm happy to, share my thoughts, Dave. I think what Google has done is made a lot of these enterprise-grade services and products accessible to a large audience, and that is fantastic, right? At the end of the day, we still have to follow best practices that we've talked about, which lie both on the hardware and the software side. I mean, we've had some discussions around cloud-based security, which is really where the Google Drive or the Google Cloud operates. But generally, what I'd say is for the purposes of use for small, medium businesses, what's important to understand that Google does have a business solution. So depending on the size of your business and the resources available to you, that is an option, and it does provide you with some additional layers of security and services. But generally speaking, I would say that Google does a pretty good job of covering the fundamentals of security and best practices. But again, I think AJ just pointed this out, is that you are connecting to your drive through your network. You have to protect your network. You are connecting to your drive through your your routers and your firewall. Make sure you protect those pieces. That's where the data transfer is happening. And so those are important pieces. Passwords, protect your passwords on your drive as much as anywhere else. And so there are certain best practices that are going to have to be fulfilled on our end. But generally, I feel fairly confident saying that the small, medium business solutions, the enterprise level solutions, or even some of the easy to access solutions that Google offers does give you a basic level of protection, provided you are doing your part to secure yourself.
I just wanted to add to that. I think, so we just talked about Google and Outlook, but think of all the other cloud-based apps you use. There could be hundreds of them. Just look at your mobile phone, what apps you have. Just look at your desktop, what apps you have. You could have hundreds of apps, and those apps are using your personal data and your business data, where are they storing the data? I think on the chat, someone just mentioned that it could be in different jurisdictions. So yes, that is a very key point. Is that data in Canada, or is that data in some other country? How does that impact the security of your data? How does that impact the privacy of your data? So you have to be aware of all the different apps which you and your business is using, and then you have to secure that and make sure that your data is not being utilized for, let's say, marketing related activity somewhere. So those are the things which you need to consider when you start thinking about cloud apps.
Indeed, thank you. I'm wondering, Carl, if you feel free to chime in if you have anything to add there.
Yeah, I listen, I think it's pretty much all been covered, and I would just close this discussion by suggesting once again that this is where, the importance of password security is very relevant. As you're putting data into either a public cloud or private cloud environment, notwithstanding the controls or sophistication or lack thereof of those environments, you have to first ensure that you're taking the necessary steps and measures as to protect the unwarranted access to that data. And it starts with the basics. So that was the only thing that I wanted to add.
Oh, thank you. One of the questions that was submitted in advance concerns network attached storage. And I wonder if one of you gentlemen could take a moment to firstly explain to the audience exactly what network attached storage is. And then, further to that, are they a good option for business, for small business? Are they secure?
Happy to share a little bit about NAS's here, Dave. So a network attached storage, might I add, is usually a cheap and efficient solution. So it makes a lot of sense to use, and they often make for a good local backup solution as well. But you do need to secure it. What you need to know about NAS devices are that they are known to have vulnerabilities, and that cyber criminals typically are, in order to exploit those vulnerabilities, have to have some sort of access to your network. And so really where I see some of the work having to be put in is around how do you secure your network, secure your router, secure your home network, make sure that you change default passwords on them, on any device that you're getting, might I add, but especially your router and any other devices you're securing around that. Always make sure not to click suspicious links, especially if they're directing you to your local network, right? And you'll usually see an IP address of some sort, 192.168. Something, and that can lead you to your local network and lead attackers to your local network. And if you still have weak password management, it gives them very quick and easy access. Again, follow password best practices for both your router as well as your NAS logins. And last part I'll add is regularly update the firmware, both on your router as well as your NAS devices. Turn on automatic updates, but keep an eye out for them and make sure that it's happening. So those are just some tips that I can share on that.
Very good, thank you. We have a few minutes left in the session, and we have some very specific questions regarding particular systems. But an interesting question that's just been put into the chat box is whether or not you would recommend a small business utilize a VPN to protect their infrastructure. So if someone would have any thoughts on whether or not we should be using VPN.
So VPN is definitely something you should utilize, especially in these days with COVID-19, when we are doing remote access to various resources of our business. When you start thinking about VPN, the important thing here is what are you connecting to? So for example, if you're connecting to your office network remotely, and you are using a VPN, that means all your information is encrypted. There's no chance of man-in-the-middle attack or session hijacking. So that's something which you want to utilize. But again, the question becomes, what are you accessing? So if you're accessing something in the cloud, then the VPN is no longer valid. We used to live in the environment which was a castle and a moat around our business assets. And if we were at home, we would log in via VPN. But now it's no longer a castle and a moat. It's basically you're all over the internet, in the cloud. You're accessing from anywhere. So yes, you should use VPN, but depends on what data you're using and what is your traffic flow for that.
I'll just toss in there. I think AJ made some really good points there. I just want to add that especially think of using a VPN if you are accessing public Wi-Fi. And as we're working from home, sometimes we're dealing with some of the pressures of having good network service, or running out of a connection, or having other people work from home. And so we do tend to even step outside, access a network that is publicly available around our homes or at a coffee shop. So just be mindful that those are some places where having a VPN connection will just offer you this extra layer of coverage. And it might also be helpful if you're conducting some e-commerce activities. So while shopping as well, that might be helpful as well.
Yeah, I would just further add to that in stating that I think the relevance of VPN capabilities and technology is made far much more relevant today as a result of the impacts of COVID-19. For those of you who work, or should I say prior to COVID, worked within a office setting, and assuming that your office, had its own network, and therefore the, implied controls that were in place. So for instance, your firewalls, your intrusion prevention or detection systems, et cetera. The internet has now morphed, at least for this period of time, and I don't foresee this changing anytime soon. The public internet has morphed to become the new corporate network. And as such, I think that, many of you, if you work within organizations of a certain size or scope, you've probably already been provided with VPNs in order to be able to run about your daily business. But for those of you who don't have that luxury, and perhaps own your own business, but find yourselves in a situation where you and your staff are also working remotely and from home, the importance of facilitating a VPN, I think, is very high. And again, for relatively little investment, you gain a lot of assurance. And so by virtue of that fact, I think as we look at sort of the more meaningful and practical ways that this security challenge can be solved, this is certainly one focal point that, as a takeaway from our discussion, if I were you, I would look to investigate and research.
All great points, gentlemen. Thank you. And as we approach the end of the session, I'm sort of reminded that we started out by talking about how we should acknowledge that we are all potentially under attack, potentially under threat, and develop a plan from there. And then we've had a great deal of very down-to-earth practical tips from you all. So I appreciate that. I'd like to wrap up with a question around, are there any systems that you recommend that someone can use to conduct an audit? Where do I sit right now? Someone in the chat box has suggested a website, Have I Been Pawned? As it's potentially a good way to inform people that they may already be at risk, and highlighting reusable or reused passwords. Are there any downloadable, reliable, inexpensive tools that could give someone an audit as to where they sit currently with their cybersecurity that you would recommend?
I think that I would answer that question in two ways. Firstly, again, depending on the size, nature, and shape of your business, your ability to go online and do a quick Google search to something toward the effect of security self-assessment questionnaire, would probably elicit a whole bunch of questions that you could in turn work through to figure out what the overall risk and/or security maturity of your organization or network is today. And that might help to illuminate, areas where, again, there needs to be perhaps additional focus or investment in people, process, and technology. For those who work within more of a larger, dare I say, more sophisticated environment, I would suggest that you look to, as a general best practice, engage with a third party who can come in and undertake that assessment, and specifically to undertake it in a way in which it's made business contextual. Because I think one of the major challenges that security professionals have had historically and even to this day is relating the security challenge back to the business, making it contextual to the business. So we have to move away from trying to engage with a non-technical audience in a technical discussion or a bits and bytes discussion. What the business understands, or the key principles within the business understand, is they understand risk. And if we make them aware of what the cyber risk is and how that cyber risk effectively impacts or relates back to business risk, I think that's where eyes are opened and ultimately actions can be undertaken that would look to either A, mitigate that risk where it's deemed to be unacceptable, or B, where in fact, let's say relevant to the investment that would need to be made, the business or the key stakeholders within the business make a decision that they're prepared to accept that risk knowingly, then they need to be able to provide sign off on it and actual acknowledgement. It's not for an IT professional at any level to make that decision. It is in fact the decision that needs to be made at the top, whether by the board, the chief executive, or someone within that C-suite who ultimately is able to take accountability and provide sign off. So yes, if you're small, quick Google search, self-assessment, security questionnaire, that's probably a great place to start. If you're a little bit larger, more sophisticated, consider consulting with a third-party organization who are experts in this field, who can come in and provide that full scope of security assessment back into your business.
I just wanted to add to Carl's point, that's some great points, but just be mindful of the regulatory framework which applies to your kind of business, and audit yourself against that. You can have generic gap assessments or cybersecurity self-assessments, but also look at what framework applies to you. For example, if you're in e-commerce, look at payment card industry data security standard, or you could have other frameworks which apply to you. So look at the regulations and make sure you adhere to them.
Those are great points. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you very, very much. We're right about time here, everyone, and I wish to be respectful of everybody's time. This has been a tremendous amount of information today. We got through the majority of the questions. If there was some that we didn't answer, I apologize. Quite a vibrant conversation and a lot to cover. Please feel free to reach out to either myself or my colleagues, the presenting partners here, the CDC or this County of Simcoe. If you have further questions, and we will endeavor to get them to the panelists and get them answered for you as quickly as possible. With that, I would just like to thank everybody again for their time. AJ, Carl, Smith, thank you so much. We sincerely appreciate your you volunteering your time to help us out here this afternoon. The Ask an Expert series is an ongoing series, so for the audience, please do stay tuned for the announcement of subsequent sessions. You will also be receiving a copy of today's recording. So thank you again for joining us. Stay safe, everybody. Stay secure in your daily lives and in your cyber life. And with that, we'll sign off, and I wish everybody a good afternoon.